So last week after I did the video on the gardening tips, of course, I got additional questions in my inbox and via text message. So I wanted to address some of those topics this morning because I realized that gardening is new to a lot of people. It's still new to me. Although I've been gardening, container gardening for about 5 years now. I learn something new every season. So, good morning, Sabrina. It's my cousin. I love you, baby. But we're going to go ahead and take a tour of the garden this morning while we wait for some additional people to join us. So, this tomato plant here, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know which variety it is. I thought it was, good morning, Vicki, my friend from Wilson. This tomato, I don't know which variety it is. I thought it was one thing, but the tomatoes on it look like teardrops, and that's not what it's supposed to be. So, but it's thriving, and I'm going to start clipping the top of it because I don't want it to get taller than my light, and it is about to do such. So, but it's doing very well. I've got basil and marigolds planted with the pot in the pot with it here, and here is another tomato plant. It's supposed to be a slicing tomato, but they look like teardrops, so I'm not sure exactly what variety it is, which brings us to a very important point. When you're planting seeds, and if you don't label your containers from the very beginning, and you say, well, I'm going to wait until it comes up, when it comes up, a lot of them look exactly the same. You won't be able to tell one thing from another, so it's important to label your plants. The world doesn't end if you don't label them. It just makes it easier. Now this one I'm sure of. This is my orange striped tomato. It's a little bit further behind. It was not quite as big when I got it as the others, but it's finally starting to get some fruit on it. And you can tell it's going to be striped by the striation in that tomato. Isn't it so cute? I love seeing my new vegetables hit the vine. My Jasper cherry tomato. They're getting ready, y'all. They're getting ready. I'm going to let them completely vine ripen. Good morning, David. Because I think they have the best flavor when they ripen on the vine. And there's my cherry indigo tomato. It's going to be a black variety. So here we have some Boston Pilkling cucumbers. Trying to get in focus. We got one growing there. And this is one that's the one that started growing first. And as you can tell, it's misshapen. But all that means is it started getting pollinated, but the pollination process wasn't complete. But guess what? It's still edible, so we're going to pick that today and eat it. This is my Muncher cucumber that is planted in succession so that I have a steady supply of cucumbers throughout the season. Cucumber plants, they don't last the whole season like a tomato plant does. So this is my Japanese eggplant. She's got a flower on her. She's getting ready, y'all. She's getting ready. And that's where the eggplant is going to develop. And a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned to you how this plant had a very healthy root system and shoots were coming up all in the container, and that I cut them off. And the reason I did that is it's time for this plant to start producing fruit. If I let all of those shoots come up, the plant's going to put its energy into creating branches and leaves, and I wanted to put its energy into producing fruit. So I'm going to clip those off at the ground level today so that I have nice long Japanese eggplant. This is my yellow potato plant, and you would look at it and think, Kim, what's wrong with it? Why is it turning yellow? Nothing is wrong with it. After your tomato plant flowers and it starts to turn yellow, this is how you know that it's getting ready. It's almost ready to harvest. So in just a few weeks now, I'm going to be harvesting my potatoes, and you know I'm going to do that live for you. So there's nothing wrong with this plant. it's just going through the normal process. The red bell pepper, I'm waiting for it to start changing colors. It's green for now. My sweet banana pepper, the mammoth jalapeno peppers. This particular one back here is ready, and you can tell because it's got the little striations in it. I'm going to pick it today, but I'm going to wait until a couple more are big enough to harvest. And then I'm going to make some stuffed jalapenos. Some kale. And then that's some collard greens. I'm just letting go to seed so I can gather the seeds. That's my yellow bell pepper. More kale. Strawberry mint. Strawberries. This is my other container of potatoes. And it's getting ready to. You see how it's falling over. Nothing wrong with it. It's just going through the process. There you have some collard greens and marigolds and my irises and begonias. I like to plant lots of flowers around the area. One, because they're pretty, but two, because they serve a purpose. So last week, we talked about some really important things, and that was one of which was insect control. Good morning, Tammy. But I forgot to mention something critically important when we were talking about insect control. Now, for our grandparents and historically, people have used Sevin Dust to control insects in your garden. And I want to implore with you not to use Sevin Dust. It is a pesticide and it kills. So that means the vegetables are getting the residue from that pesticide on them. So now you're still ingesting pesticide. And two, it kills all insects. It does not discriminate. So it will kill all the bad insects, all your aphids and caterpillars and such. But it also kills your bees, your ladybugs, your butterflies, the things that you want in your garden. So I'm asking you to stop using Sevin Dust. Now, a lot of people who use more natural gardening techniques also use neem oil. I have used neem oil. I have not used any this season because it still kills all insects. The only difference is neem is not as synthetically made. It comes from it's an essential oil essentially. But neem oil, if you're going to use it, spray it in the evening time when bees are less active. So it will kill all your bad insects, but bees are less likely to come in contact with it. But if they do come in contact with it, it's going to kill them too. So I've even stopped using neem oil unless it's absolutely necessary when all my other techniques are not working. But again, as I said, this season I haven't used any. So the couple of questions that I got during the week were, well, the first one was about the soil in your garden. So please know that I'm talking specifically to container gardening. I'm not talking about in-ground gardening. I'm not an expert at that. I don't know a whole lot about it. But I know when you're using, the question was, can I just use dirt from my yard to fill my containers? And you can, but it's not preferable. And here's why. The ground or earth from your backyard is too heavy for containers. You should use a quality potting mix mixed with some type of amendment. In the years past, I used Black Cow. This year, which was great, I had no issues with it. The vegetables grew perfectly fine. But this year, I used an organic mushroom compost, and that is what I'm going to continue to use going forward, because when I say my plants took off in a way that they never have before, they took off this year. Those peppers are so much further along than what they were last year, even though I planted at a similar time. So you can use soil from your backyard, but it's too heavy. Potting mix has other things incorporated with it so that you don't overwater your plants and you don't underwater your plants. So it helps to keep your plant healthier, because you have to remember that if your ground gets wet, the water either runs off or it continues to seep down into the ground. That's not the case with a container. If we have a lot of rain or you overwater, the water just sits in the container until it can be evaporated, which can be slow if it's a whole lot of rain or water. So that your plants will get root rot and the plant dies. So when you use potting mix, it has ingredients in it that will absorb some of the water and help the water to drain quicker. Garden soil doesn't have that. So when you go to a big box store and you see the bags labeled potting soil and then some that are in-ground or garden soil, there's a difference in the two. The garden bag is meant to be used in your garden, whether you're doing field rows or you're doing, you know, just small plots in your yard, whereas the potting mix specifically is used for containers. You can use topsoil in your containers, but you're going to have to add some additional things to it. Some amendments, some organic matter, some of those things, because topsoil is just that. It's just topsoil. It doesn't have any kind of nutrients in it that's going to feed your plants long term. So that's a little bit about the soil. The next question I got was about my pot size, and I see this a lot with container planting because it's really cute. You know, a lot of the trends on the TikTok and on the reels, you see the videos where people are using these little bitty little containers, and you can for some vegetables, like some of your smaller herbs, some of your lettuces and things that have really shallow roots. But plants like tomatoes and peppers, even collard greens, they have an extensive root system. You want to put them in a container that's large enough for their roots to expand, to grow, and to absorb the nutrients. So if you put them in a little bitty little pot, the chances are the plant is not going to do as well as it would have had you put it in a larger container. So when I'm planting my vegetables, I try not to go any smaller than a 3-gallon container. So my kale is in 3-gallon containers, but my tomatoes and my peppers, they're in 5-gallon and up. Like the tomatoes behind me, they are in a 15-gallon bag. And you'd be like, wow, that's a lot of potting soil. You don't fill the whole thing with potting soil. You do layers. So you fill the very bottom with like sticks and leaves and yard debris, because those things decompose over time and they will create more soil. And then the very top, maybe 4 or 5 inches, is your potting soil, because it can get expensive really quickly if you're filling up all of these large containers with all potting soil. But the trick to that is you put in organic material, cardboard, things that are going to decompose over time, things that are going to feed your root system, and things that are going to invite earthworms and the beneficial insects, because, you know, earthworms are really good for the soil and they enrich it more. So with your pots, if it's going to be a tomato, a pepper, an eggplant, I have never grown okra, but if you want to make sure, good morning Tara, you want to make sure that you're using a pot that's large enough to support it. And while we're talking about pots, so you notice we do companion planting a lot. We do the marigolds and the onions and basil and just about everything that's behind me. But you want to do that in such a way that the plants are not competing with each other. Don't plant two heavy feeders together. Or when I say heavy feeders, meaning they like a lot of nutrients. So with corn, you can do corn in containers. But one, it needs to be a large container. And you don't want to put it in a container with other plants that it's going to compete with for the nutrients. Like in my plot of my 3 sisters, I've got sunflowers and corn planted together. But I made sure that I amended that soil very well. I made sure that I fed it throughout the season, so that both plants thrive and they get the nutrients that they need. But if you put a sunflower and corn in the same container, they're going to compete with each other, and somebody's going to lose. So you want to make sure that you research your plants a little bit, so that, because there are some things that that grow really well together, and there are some things that you never put together. One will stunt the growth of the other, and that's just going to require a little research on your behalf. You know, all of us have an expert at our disposal. Her name is Google. Google it. YouTube it. look for blogs on it. Now, I have to caution you about blogs, because a blog is just somebody writing what their opinion is. It may not be correct. So it's going to be some trial and error. So a coach of mine I had a real long time ago said this when we were talking about going to events, and sometimes the people there didn't have the exact same beliefs as you did. And her advice was, take what you need and leave the rest on the table. Meaning, absorb the information that's beneficial to you, but if it's something that goes against your belief system, your moral system, or your cultural systems, then just leave it. You don't have to follow it. Just leave it there. So take what you need from the blogs or whatever and leave the rest on the table. Because what works well in Knightdale, North Carolina may not be true for someone who's living in Spokane, Washington. The climate is entirely different. The soil is different. So you gotta take all of that in consideration. Somebody who's writing a blog in Florida, that's not going to be true for here. Florida is kind of warm year round. They're in a different zone, and I'm thinking they're in 9 and 10. We're in 7. Different growing zone, different conditions, different requirements. So you have to take all of that stuff with a grain of salt, because something that they're telling you to do and they're in a different zone, it might kill your plant. So that's just something to take into consideration when you're planting things and choosing your plant size, pot size. We kind of got off topic, but it all goes together. And the last thing I'm going to cover this morning is, and Vicki, this is specifically for you. We talked about watering this week, and watering your containers. The impulse is to water them every day. But you don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't do that. Before you water them, you always want to check the soil first, and you just simply stick your finger into the top of the pot about an inch. If the soil feels dry, then you give it some water. But if it's still damp and wet, you don't water, because again, you don't want to overwater your plant. Overwatering can kill a plant quicker than underwatering. But so you want to check your soil, and then when you water it, water at the base of the plant. There are a few plants that like to be water overhead, but for the most of them, that is a breeding ground for disease. So you water at the base of your plant so you get less water splashed up on the plant and on the leaves. And as a matter of fact, on all of my plants, not the greens, but on the peppers, the eggplant, and the tomatoes, the lower branches, I have removed them all so that it's less likely that they will come in contact with water, because that's a breeding ground for bacteria and viruses and things that are going to be harmful to your plant. Now, some things you can't stop. Sometimes it's just like us. Sometimes it's going to get sick. Sometimes it's going to get, but there are ways that you can mitigate that just naturally. Just research what it is that you're trying to resolve. So when you're watering, the best time to water is in the morning, and you give it a good soaking until the water runs out of the bottom of the container. And there are 2 reasons. That gives the plant time to absorb some of the water before it gets scorching hot, and it gets this nice good drink before it has to endure the heat of the day. Now, for some of us, well, not for me, I work from home. Some of us, that's just not realistic. I'm not going to be outside at 5 a.m. watering plants. As much as I love them, I like my sleep too. Some of us, we water in the evening. And the rule for that is, I want to water early enough so that the plant's not wet overnight, but I want to pay particular attention that I'm watering at the base. Because again, you don't want to get your leaves wet and then they're wet overnight. I still can't talk. A breeding ground for bad things to happen. So water in the morning if you can, but if it does not fit your schedule, water in the evening, and just make sure that you're watering at the base of the plant, that you are watering early enough that so the leaves that do get wet, because water sprays, some of it is going to still get wet, that they have time to dry before the night cool down, and you know, you have these water droplets sitting on the leaves all night. That's not a good thing. So that is my 3 tips on container gardening this morning. Again, I want to implore with you, the tips that I've given apply to container gardening. It's not in-ground gardening. Sometimes it's a little bit different, because even when it comes to your soil and stuff, sometimes if you're doing in-ground, I know you want to test your soil. We don't have to do that with containers because we're using potting soil. So before I end today, were there any questions from anybody that's watching this morning? We got quite an audience. Did anybody have any questions that they wanted to address? And hopefully I know the answer to it, because again, I've been doing this 5 years. I know a lot, but every day I learn something new. But listen, guys, so we know we have Juneteenth coming up on Monday, and I know a lot of celebrations are going on today. So I hope you guys go out and take part in some of the festivities that are happening all over the country today for Juneteenth. And be safe and have fun and learn something about the culture. It is, regardless of what culture you belong to, learn something about another person's culture. I'm telling you, it will really enlighten you and change the way you think about things. But guys, thank you for watching this episode of In the Garden with Joyful Living, and tuning in for our gardening tips on today. Again, if you have questions, inbox me, send me a text, all of those, and we will address it on next week. Guys, thank you for watching. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.